Recorded live from Hong Kong and Toronto. Let's go! This is the PR and Law Podcast.
The PR and Law Podcast.
Turn it up. With your hosts, Cam McMurchie and Ewan Christie.
We've made it all the way to episode number 9. Welcome to the PR and Law Podcast. I am your host, Cam McMurchie, along with Ewan Christie.
Hello, Cameron.
I'm a PR guy based in Hong Kong and publisher of the Digital Bits PR and Communications newsletter, and you can find that over at digitalbitspr.com. Ewan is an employment lawyer and partner at Duntroon LLP in Toronto, Canada, and you can find his firm online at duntroonllp.law. So just off the top, we just want to remind you again, if you could, share this podcast with a friend. It's the only marketing that we've got. It matters a lot to us. And you can also find us on social media as well, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And our account name is PR Law Podcast. So you can go to twitter.com/PR Law Podcast, facebook.com/PR Law Podcast, etc., etc., etc. And you can support us on Patreon. That would also mean a lot to us. You can find our Patreon page by going to prlawpodcast.com and clicking support the show. Lastly, you can also listen to the show on YouTube, which is a very popular way these days to listen to podcasts. So that's open for you as well. Ewan, what is happening back in the center of the universe?
Well, you should probably give some context to that for those who aren't from Canada as to why we call ourselves the center of the universe here in Toronto, Cam.
Yeah, that's a good point. Toronto sort of has a New York kind of feel for locals anyway, who or no, I guess the better way to explain is people outside of Toronto think Toronto is rather arrogant and can't see the rest of the country, let alone worry about what's happening there. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I guess that's probably fair to say. I don't think Torontonians feel that way. But yeah, I mean, it's often sort of pegged as the sort of self-important center of the country because a lot of the media is based here, the financial center is based here. But again, I don't know that Torontonians necessarily look at themselves in that regard.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah, things are okay. Things are okay. We're our state of emergency has been extended basically till the end of June, which means we're all still in lockdown. The rest of the country seems to be doing better than we've been doing. I guess with a notable exception of Quebec. I see BC is still crushing it, and they're opening. The New York Times is doing profiles on Bonnie Henry and the job that she's done weathering the COVID storm. But not us, Cam. We're stuck inside at least for a few more weeks.
Yeah, 300 new cases a day you were mentioning. I think that's quite high overall. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but like Hong Kong is just over 1,000 cases in total. But if we're going to talk COVID-19, let's do it this way. Yeah. All right. Sorry, COVID-19, a little hip hop music. Okay, so Ewan, worldwide, in case you didn't know, 6.66 million cases of COVID-19, 393,000 deaths, almost 400,000. I could have never imagined this when the first cases were being reported out of Wuhan. It's just mind-blowing. In the U.S., almost 2 million cases in total, and 111,000 people have died in the United States of COVID-19, at least the ones that we know of who died of COVID-19. And here, Ewan, and I wanted to bring this up again in contrast to sort of what's happening in some other places. And I'm not crediting the government here with this or anything, but I mean, I've been out this weekend. It's been a bit rainy. But even last week, I mean, we are 100% back to normal. I mean, the streets are packed. And of course, it's very humid here. We've been hitting 30 degrees, and you know what it's like when you've got, 98% humidity. And no cases being transmitted locally. We still have the odd one flying in, but there's more and more places I've noticed that require a mask to be worn before you're able to enter that shop. And I can't think of any off the top of my head in particular, but I'm seeing that a lot on restaurants or in individual shops in shopping malls, things like that. And I think, the mask, not to beat a dead horse, we've done this so often, but the mask is a really simple, cheap, easy thing to do to to hopefully severely curtail the spread of the virus?
Well, I mean, I think we got to talk about the WHO, who sort of finally came out this week and said, yeah, you know what, maybe wearing a mask is a good idea. Obviously, they're a little late to the party in that regard, but I mean, I guess better late than never, in saying what most of us knew to be true all along, that wearing a mask probably isn't such a bad idea. It's not, it's not a magic bullet by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a start, and it's a good idea going forward, right?
I'm very curious to see what happens in the US with these, big protests, big gatherings. If there's going to be sort of maybe not a second wave, but just sort of a lot more cases popping up. Because, in the material that I've read, it does take, 10 to 14 days before somebody starts to show symptoms. So, they've always said that we're about 2 weeks behind. In 2 weeks, we will see the results of the efforts we're taking today. And that works both ways. I mean, if there's a lot of people out, we don't see cases right away. It will take a couple of weeks before they start popping up. But I think that's a legitimate risk, especially in the cities where they're still, really battling this pandemic.
It's funny you mention that, because there was some pushback here. I think we talked about 2 weeks ago. There was a huge gathering at Trinity Bellwoods Park, which is one of the huge parks here in Toronto. And, people out. No one was practicing social distancing. And of course, there was outrage and uproar on social media about this, saying, look, this is just going to set us back. Well, it's now sort of been 2 weeks since that occurred. And, a lot of people are now pushing back online, saying, well, hey, wait a minute, what about that dramatic increase in reported cases we were expecting because of all those people that got together in the park? Is there any evidence to suggest that all of these people not practicing social distancing has created some sort of catastrophic ripple effect across the city and spread of new cases? Again, I don't really know that sort of argument is constructive or productive, but hey, I mean, I think a lot of people are starting to feel that way, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, are people, because I haven't seen much coverage about Canada, but are people there kind of getting to that point where they're a bit stir crazy, they're a bit frustrated, they want to go back to normal and willing to sort of take more risks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are. And what's interesting is the government, of course, is under a great deal of pressure. Like all governments, the longer this goes on, the more pressure there is to gradually reopen things, to try and get the economy back to some sort of semblance of normal. We saw the mayor of Toronto earlier this week announced that they're going to be introducing some new rules for outdoor patios. Effectively, as I understand, certain restaurants and bars that have some patio access, they can extend that access into the streets. Some streets will be closed in order to permit socially safe distancing bars and restaurants, so these businesses can reopen and try and stay alive. Because probably one of the hardest hit industries has been the service industry and people. It's the summertime here, and of course, I mean, you know what it's like in the dead of winter here, Cam. It's cold, it's dark. Mm-hmm. So when the summer comes, people want to get out. And I think there's a lot of pressure on the government to gradually reopen things to try and accommodate the public in that regard.
For sure. I want to get into a little bit more about COVID, and I think you've got something to share. And also, later on in the show, we're also going to take a look at HBO Max. It's a new service that was launched. You may have heard about it, but I think it makes an excellent case study when we're looking at sort of PR and marketing. But before we get to that, we will talk about our legal case of the day just on the other side.
Continue the debate with us on social media. Join us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at PR Law Podcast. All one word, PRLAW Podcast. Send us your questions now by email to askus@prlawpodcast.com. That's all one word, askus@prlawpodcast.com. Or on social media with the hashtag PRLawPod. That's hashtag PRLAWPOD.
All right, you dog, what's up?
I wanted to talk about an article actually that I shared on my social network this week, and I got a lot of feedback, a lot of comments from lawyers practicing in the community, and this isn't unique to the legal profession. I think it speaks volumes to any profession, and that's it was a New York Times article discussing the pandemic's impact on women in the labor force. And rather than sort of summarize the article, I think I'm just going to read a brief quote, which really sort of summarizes the crux of what's going on. And that's this. So women have carried an outsized share of the burden, more likely to lose a job, and more likely to shoulder the load of closed schools and daycare. For many working mothers, the gradual reopening won't solve their problems, but compound them, forcing them out of the labor force or into part-time jobs while increasing their responsibilities at home, end quote. And as you might expect, I got a lot of feedback from female colleagues, effectively saying, yeah, this is a huge issue. It's a huge issue in a lot of professions, and it's definitely something we're going to need to look at. I mean, we know statistically, Cam, that among married couples who are working full time, women already they're providing close to 70% of the childcare during standard working hours. Those are the standard in the the quote unquote normal times, and of course we're dealing with anything but standard right now. The evidence also seems to indicate that women spend on average 15 more hours per week on household tasks and educating their children than men. And my concern is this, and I was speaking with my wife a lot about what's going on. If the childcare centers and the schools and the day camps, the summer camps, if they all remain closed, what are we going to do as the economy gradually reopens and the expectation is that people return to work? For a lot of lawyers, for example, the courts are starting to talk about reopening. Well, that's great, but what are you going to do if you have a motion you have to attend, or a trial, or any other matter you have to go and speak to directly in the court? You can't very well say to the court or to opposing counsel, hey, sorry, I'm not going to be able to make it because I've got to stay home and take care of my child. And these are very, very real issues. And what's unfortunate is women consistently are bearing the brunt of this. And if we have more women staying home, Cam, then the ripple effect of that is going to be significant. It's going to mean, once again, fewer women in senior roles, greater pay inequity, fewer work opportunities. And as everyone knows, it's a lot easier to find another job when you already have one, right? I mean, once you quit, getting back into the job market can be really, really difficult. And the longer that you're out, the harder it's going to be to get back in.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I think, Ewan, when you describe this, I feel like this is not a new problem. What it is, it's an old problem that has had light shone on it once again, because it's exacerbated in this kind of environment. So, when we talk about women doing a lot of the caring for children or housework or whatnot, I mean, these are issues even in normal times, and they've gotten worse now. And I'm always leery of these sort of social problems and how to approach them, because I think according to different ideologies and thoughts, there's different paths to kind of address this issue. And when there is a social issue like this, I get nervous a little bit, because the paths forward can be quite controversial. And it's clearly something that needs to be addressed, but I get the sense that it's going to have to be a mix of actions pertaining to just sort of social changes, changing social norms of sort of expectations, when couples get together. Because I know even much younger friends than me, or my friends much younger than me, still have these issues when they get married. There's still, in a lot of cases, the male jumps to begin doing certain male things around the house, and vice versa with the female. And I think it has to start there. It has to start with couples sitting down and talking about what their needs are, what they want to do, what they feel they have to do, and try and reach some sort of conclusion. Because at the moment, you're right. I think it's women who are suffering more.
Yeah, and it ties a lot into something we discussed a couple weeks ago as well, Cam. The idea of those businesses with really, really sort of outdated notions of what the workplace should look like. And they continue to insist on FaceTime and compelling workers to come into the office. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it should be that we need to see some real structural change in the labor force, right? We need to see more flexible work arrangements. We need to see better and more affordable childcare options, and we need to see men carrying more of the load at home. The New York Times article, we'll share it. One of the interesting statistics in the article was that men who can work from home, they're doing about 50% more childcare than the men that don't. So, this isn't really rocket science. If we have more men that have the ability to work from home, they're going to be more involved in what goes on in the home, be it childcare, be it educating children who aren't currently in school, be it doing some of the domestic housework, cooking, cleaning, etc. But I think there's also a good economic argument here, and we've also talked about that in previous episodes, where fewer bricks and mortar offices means businesses saving money. So I think it would behoove any small business or larger company, and some of them have taken steps. I know Pepsi and Shopify, for example, have been outspoken about trying to create more flexible work arrangements going forward. But companies ultimately can save money in doing this. So really, it strikes me as sort of a win-win. It's just going to require some more forward thinking on the part of employers and their employees.
Which is a lot to ask for, I think. If we're waiting for companies to come forward voluntarily to make these changes, I think we may be waiting a very long time. So, the question is there anything else that can be done outside of that? While we wait and wait for companies to be proactive, is there another channel that we can use?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I think that, to your point, couples need to be having those kinds of discussions themselves in the home as well, right? Again, there should not be the assumption that, well, look, you've consistently done the cooking and the cleaning, so you're going to continue to do the cooking and the cleaning, whether that's the man or the woman playing that particular role. Couples need to talk about this stuff. They need to have conversations to the effect of, well, hey, what can I do to try and carry more of the load? Or what can we do to try and establish some, better equilibrium here? Because I know you have work demands. I know I have work demands. And we have childcare demands. We have to try and strike that balance somewhere. So there needs to be some discussion within the home. And then I think the next step, once you can kind of sort of establish what the expectation and the desires are internally within your own home, well, then you can then make those requests to your employer. You can go and you can ask your employer, hey, look, the reality is that neither my partner nor I are in a position to return to the office. Can we talk about a flexible work arrangement? Is there some other way that we can make this work? I think that has to be a starting point. And, if there's enough pressure on employers, then, on some level, they're going to have to accommodate those employees, or they're going to start to lose good talent to those companies who are prepared to make those changes.
Yeah, I agree with you in principle on this, absolutely. But I do want to ask you as well. It seems strange to me because parents are suffering because school is canceled or daycare or whatever it might be because of the pandemic. So the kids are at home, which is unexpected. And, it has it's a bit of a domino because, like you say, they can't go to work then as a result of their kids being home. Is there any recourse that these parents can take legally? And I'm guessing there is not. But for all of the parents that basically structure their working hours of their lives around their kids' schooling schedule, because that change and could have a drastic economic impact on their well-being, actually, their income. Is there any recourse? Is there any way to hold anyone responsible for that or to seek help?
Well, yeah. And again, this is one of those issues where it really sort of depends on where you are. It depends on the employer. It depends on whatever governing legislation is in your particular jurisdiction. And again, I know you hate it when I say stuff like that, Cam, because it's sort of a lawyerly way to avoid answering the question. But the reality is that, yeah, there is no sort of one size fits all solution to that particular problem or answer to that particular question. It really has to be a dialogue that you engage in with your employer in telling them what you need and relative to what they need. Now, obviously, in some contexts, that's not possible. I mean, if you're a delivery driver, for example, you can't sit down with your employer and say, hey, can I work from home a few days a week? That's just not realistic. And again, we have the Human Rights Code here in Ontario. There's human rights codes in the majority of provinces in Canada, and some human rights codes, human rights code like legislation and a lot of states in the U.S. as well. And here in Ontario, of course, employers have a duty to accommodate their employees up to the point of undue hardship. So, whatever their decisions are, they can't be perceived to be discriminatory on the basis of gender or marital status. So there is some flexibility and accommodation there. But again, using the delivery truck example, you could be a working mother or a working father and have 3-4 children. Your employer isn't going to be in a position to accommodate you working from home when you're a delivery driver. It's not feasible unless there's some other role within the company that they can sort of temporarily place you until things get back to normal, which in fairness a lot of businesses have done. But short of that, yeah, I don't know. There isn't really a one size fits all solution to this.
These are all victims. I think this is why COVID-19 is so tragic, is there are a lot of people, millions of people who are victims of this pandemic and really have no legit recourse in many cases. I think it was positive last week that there were some new jobs created in the United States. That's a big step forward. But I want to take a look at this from a very, very sort of broad scope, from a very high level. And that is, I think the one thing that COVID-19 taught us, and we have mentioned this before, is that a lot of people can work from home. And obviously not the truck drivers like you mentioned. But because that barrier has kind of been broken down, I think it's taught bosses and supervisors and senior executives that it can be done and the work can still get done when people are at home. And now, I've really felt strongly about this for a very long time. People ask me if I mind getting work phone calls or emails or messages, late at night or on a weekend that I have to respond to. And I always say, I don't mind that. I don't mind it at all because I'm doing my job. However, when I need some time for myself personally, I would like my employer to also understand that. So it's not I'm in the office from 8 until 6 every day, and then I must also be on call all night and all weekend. It should be, the hours are set. I'll try and be there for most of that, but you know how life goes. Sometimes we're going to have to help the company in the evening or the weekend or even on holiday. And sometimes I may need a little bit of time, and I would like my company to agree to that. And I think if it's approached this way, I think there might be able to be some breakthroughs, but it's just so difficult to change entrenched thinking. And it's a bigger problem here in Asia, obviously, which is even more conservative. Sitting there at your desk or in your office is actually required by a lot of the companies in Hong Kong, to the point where people won't go home until the boss goes home first, which drives me insane because I'm often in that situation. I work better at night, so I often stay later. And I can see my teammates waiting around. And I always tell them, please go home, just go home. You don't have to stay because I'm here. But it's so deeply ingrained. And I know this doesn't affect Canada at the same level, but it is deeply ingrained thinking and behavior, and it's very, very difficult to change.
Yeah, well, and you're right, and that does the way that manifests in a virtual working environment. To your point, it doesn't mean people are working less. It means they're working more. And if there is any doubt or any concern that but people working from home, I mean, they're just going to slack off and they're not going to do anything. Well, all the evidence strongly suggests the opposite, which is that everyone is working far more than they used to, because to your point, there are no sort of set established hours. You don't come into the office at a particular time or leave the office at a particular time. You're effectively fielding messages all day, every day, and in the evening as well. There are no clear boundaries. Now, I think that on a long enough timeline, as we sort of learn how to work from home. Because, and again, let's not take for granted that a lot of people have been working from home for years in a virtual capacity. For a lot of people, this is nothing new. But for those businesses where this is something new, it's like anything else. You have to learn how to do it. What are the parameters? What are the expectations? All of that stuff has to be clearly established. And because none of this was planned, the idea of all of us all of a sudden overnight working from home, a lot of these parameters never were formally established. So we're effectively trying to figure it out as we go. I'm hopeful that on a long enough timeline, we will create some firmer boundaries in terms of when people are expected to respond to emails or be present for calls and what have you. But to your point, right now it still seems like a bit of a free for all.
You mentioned that some employers might be concerned that their employees are slacking off, and I've always wondered, how this is any different to an employee being in the office. I mean, an employee can be in the office and slacking off all day long. I mean, they're at a computer connected to the internet. I mean, they could run their own business, while they're sitting at work. And there's no way to fully prevent that unless you're using software that does the screenshots and the keyboard logging, which is an awful invasion of privacy, although some companies do that. So I think slacking off can happen home or at work. But secondly, bosses should be aware about what their employees are doing. And, if their employees have time to do nothing, it means they don't have enough work. And from my perspective, I want my team to perform. I want them to deliver what I expect them to deliver. Honestly, I do not care when or how they do that. Well, I care about the how to some degree, but, because as long as the work is done and it's done well, then where you did that means nothing. And the same can go for the other way with slacking on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't make any sense to me either, this idea that you have to be slacking if you're working at home, whereas if you're sitting in the office, you couldn't possibly be slacking off. I mean, it's preposterous. You could be sitting in front of a computer staring at a blank screen or surfing the internet and to your point, unless the employer Amazon has some sort of monitoring of your web activity, they really have no idea what it is that you're physically doing when you're sitting there in the office. I wanted to touch briefly, because you mentioned it, Cam, the job numbers, because this sort of ties back into my original argument about how women are being disproportionately impacted by this. You mentioned the U.S. economy, and that it did, to your point, it surprisingly added 2.5 million jobs in May. We added jobs here in Canada too. There was a prediction from economists that we were going to lose a further 500,000 jobs in the month of May, and surprisingly, we added 290,000, which is great. But what I thought was more interesting was that, rather tellingly, male employment increased more than twice as fast as that for women through the month of May in terms of those new jobs, particularly mothers with at least one child under the age of 6. So, again, this just sort of goes back to the initial point. Women are being hit really, really hard by this. And statistically, they're going to bear the brunt of a lot of these losses. And I'm concerned that there's going to be an erosion of a lot of the progress that's been made in the labor force in terms of, gender equality across all kinds of professions. Be it law or otherwise. And what are we going to do to try and sort that out? I don't know, but it's definitely concerning.
It will be impossible to solve this issue in relation to COVID-19 without solving it, in a broader scope, because they're related. I mean, the issue of childcare, division of labor, working, being laid off, time at work, time at home, on call. These are all issues that, affect women and men everywhere. So it has to be addressed at that level. And then the knock-on benefit comes down to something from COVID-19. But anyway, I'm with you. I hope this is something that is addressed. I'm not optimistic, to be honest. I think there can be change, and there's been change over time in many other similar areas. But I think this kind of change moves at a glacial pace, and so we'll have to be patient.
Agreed.
All right. Thanks, you. And we're on the other side here. I'm going to dive into HBO Max.
Show your support to the PR and Law podcast by making a one-time donation or setting up a subscription with us on Patreon. Every little bit helps us keep the lights on and bring the show to you each week. If you'd like to chip in, please visit prandlawpodcast.com. That's prandlawpodcast.com. Click support the show. Thanks for helping us out.
Okay, before diving into that, I did want to look up Hong Kong's jobless rate because I actually, it has been published. I hadn't been paying attention, so I looked it up. So as of May, the end of May, the jobless rate in Hong Kong was 5.2%, which isn't bad. Usually Hong Kong's unemployment rate hovers around 2%. So 5.2, I mean, it has increased a lot in relative terms, but not a lot overall. I'm a little bit surprised by that.
Yeah, I'd say you're sitting pretty at 5.2% relative to the rest of the world. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's not bad. Okay, I gotta perk up a bit here too. I feel like I'm sluggish. I'm a little bit low energy for some reason. Okay, so Ewan, have you heard about HBO Max?
Yeah, I mean, just bits and pieces here and there on the Twitters and what have you, but not much, no.
Okay, so I mean, what is it? I mean, do you know what it is? I'm not putting you on the spot to ridicule you or somehow make fun of you, but I'm just curious if you're familiar with what it is or how it works.
No, I mean, my understanding is just that it's a new HBO platform with new programming, is it not?
Okay. Yes, in a very broad way. Now, there's a lot of commentary online at the moment about how HBO rolled out HBO Max. And it's such a great case study in general, I think, about branding and the value of brand. So a lot of people, we see brands everywhere. We see them on buildings and trucks and billboards and television and Spotify and on and on and on and on. So people are aware of branding. But I mean, the one thing that is difficult is to build up a valuable brand. And it's even harder to keep that brand at that high level of recognition and prestige. So, I mean, HBO in particular, if we take a look at, what they have recently done was in May, towards the end of May, they rolled out this new product, HBO Max. And I think it's fair to say, and if you take a look at some branding audits, HBO, it does have a good reputation for quality programming. A lot of the shows that they create, like I personally enjoy them a lot. I think you do too. Just to name a few that HBO has done: Game of Thrones, The Sopranos, Sex and the City, True Blood, The Wire, Big Little Lies, Succession. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Succession, waiting for season 3. So it has done well. But it does take time to build that up. I mean, HBO has been around 50 years, if you can believe it. And so it wasn't this way at the beginning. A similar story with ESPN. When they started, they had no sports rights.
50 years, really? I had no idea.
And it took a long time for ESPN to build that up. So, but HBO is finding itself sort of in the crosswinds of change. So, I mean, without getting too into the weeds, these cable channels have made money by, signing agreements with cable companies to be included, on someone's cable package. And that's very lucrative. That's how a lot of, stations made their money, HBO included. And people will pay quite a bit, actually, to get HBO programming. So, when Netflix launched and things slowly started to move online, HBO was in a very difficult situation because they didn't want to just launch an app and put it online, because even if all of their existing customers, actually maybe not all, even if a large number of their existing cable subscribers switched to HBO's own product, it wouldn't recoup the losses from cable. Like, cable is the number one way they make money. So they were kind of stuck there because people were calling for access to HBO on their Apple TVs and Rokus, and they couldn't do it. So in 2010, they rolled out HBO Go. So HBO Go has now been around 10 years as of this year. And basically what it is a way to watch HBO via an app on set-top boxes like Roku or PlayStation and that kind of thing. But the caveat is you have to have a cable subscription. You have to already be subscribing to HBO through your cable provider. So, I mean, this was one way to serve their market, is you like HBO as part of your cable, so they give you a free app. You can watch HBO on your phone or wherever you are, and that's great. But the demand continued to increase for people who wanted to sign up just for HBO services. I would be one included in that, actually. I don't watch a lot of TV at all, but I think HBO is worthwhile. Why is it worthwhile? Because they make quality programs. So HBO Now rolled out in 2015. And this was HBO's way of saying, okay, we will create a standalone app like Netflix, and people can pay for it. It's $14.99 per month. And that way you can watch all of the HBO shows. You can go back and way deep into their library of shows and watch them on demand on iPad or iPhone or Android or Apple TV, blah, 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 blah. Self-explanatory. And this really primarily appealed to cord cutters or people who didn't have HBO as part of their cable package. So fast forward to last month, May 2020. HBO launched HBO Max. There are now 3 distinct products based on an app, which right off the top would be a little bit of a red flag from a branding point of view. So HBO.
So hang on. Just let me get this straight for a second. So
Yes.
There's now HBO. Well, there's now HBO Now. There's HBO Go. There's HBO Max, and then of course there's just good old fashioned HBO. Is that right?
As part of your cable package. Yeah, if you count that, there's 4 HBO products.
Huh. Okay.
So what HBO is doing is it's taking its HBO library of content and putting it into HBO Max. Then HBO is going out to buy content. A couple of the names have been released already. South Park, Big Bang Theory, Wonder Woman. These shows will now be part of HBO Max. And then in addition to that, they're also going to create new shows specifically for HBO Max. They will not run on your cable channel. So they're sort of throwing 3 big buckets of content into one service. And it's been confusing for people. I mean, people don't want to look through the differences of 3 similar services and how they work and how you sign up. So naturally, there's going to be some problems there. So, I mean, that's how the service works, to my understanding. And I want to now throw to the chairman of Warner Media Entertainment, which owns HBO, because the chairman, Bob Greenblatt, was on a Vox Media podcast recently to talk about HBO Go. And I mean, one of the questions he got is why this sort of structure of 3 different apps and why HBO Max would be valuable to customers.
Why is it going to be good for the consumer? I think it's a wildly exciting value proposition, which in, I guess, layman's speak is to say that we have a lot of great content. I mean, it's an extraordinary level of excellence. And it, of course, starts with the HBO service in its complete totality. And beyond that, we have extraordinary library content from arguably the greatest film and television libraries in the world at Warner Brothers. And we've acquired third-party content, and I can go into more detail on all that. But we're also making a whole new slate of original content that we call Max Originals, which will fill out the programming that HBO doesn't currently offer. And by that, I mean aimed at younger demos, kids, teenagers, young adults, as well as genres that HBO doesn't typically do, such as scripted and unscripted and reality shows. So when you put all that together, we think it is pretty undeniable.
Now that sounds to me like Greenblatt doesn't really know who he's going after. And so he's just throwing everything at the wall. He's just going to put in...
Well, you know what? He also, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you should never use extraordinary and excellence in the same sentence. I don't know where he was going with that.
Yeah. So HBO is basically trying to see what works. And you heard him sort of talking about some of the demographics they're going after. They talked about kids and adults and all these sort of different groups of people, which is very difficult to do. I mean, right there is a red flag. I mean, it sort of goes into marketing 101. You define your customer. Who is this person? You know, and based on your sort of caricature of a person or a customer, you build your business around that. It's something sort of very early in the marketing life cycle. So naturally, people are confused. There's a lot of questions online. It's kind of hurt HBO somewhat because it is known for this high quality content. This seems like something a little bit different. I'm going to give you one more clip of Greenblatt because he was asked a good question by Peter Kafka, who is with Vox Media and hosted the podcast. And he said, asked to Bob, who is the person who doesn't like HBO, but will be convinced to buy HBO Max? Because clearly the fans of HBO are already paying for this through their HBO Now. So they're trying to get new people. So who is this person that would want to buy this?
Well, we think there's, 100 some million people in the country that, that would be on that list. And, while I'm being a little flippant about it, we do know that there are people who, for many years have said HBO isn't for me. They don't program the kinds of things that I like, or maybe they have kids and there's not a lot of kids programming. We hope that when you realize that HBO Max is so much more than just HBO, you might be interested in subscribing. And I also think in reverse, this will accrue to HBO's benefit, because I think there are some people who don't think that HBO is right for them, but just don't know how much great content is in there. And I think when it's put together on one platform, it'll all be served up together. And I think you will find content that you might otherwise not have known about that could be great for you. And specifically, we can talk about this all day long. It's Friends, and it's South Park, and it's Big Bang Theory, and it's, 400 classic movies, and, it's The West Wing, and all of the great HBO shows, which you may or may not know about. And then new things that we're going to serve up to you for the next several years that is just going to keep accruing to, hopefully, kids and all, as I said, all the other demos. It's Sesame Street. It's, the Ghibli film library. It's anime. It's programming from everything from, Adult Swim and DC Comics and Looney Tunes and CNN Films. I mean, there's so much great content in the totality of it that we think it will be really exciting once we, get that word out.
What does that sound like to you, Ewan?
It sounds, first of all, it just sounds terrible. It sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. But it also sounds like HBO has decided that they want to be all things to all people. And what, I'm also a huge fan of HBO. And frankly, if it was a choice between Netflix and HBO, I'd let Netflix go before I'd let HBO go. But I think one of the things that I've always enjoyed about HBO, at least in terms of my understanding of their brand or perception of that brand, is that they've always focused on quality over quantity. Their hit to miss ratio is exceptional. Whereas, Netflix is clearly like, we're just going to bombard you with content, be it original programming, being it pulling in television shows and films from other studios or other networks. HBO has always been, they've always showed restraint and said, we're going to keep it slim. So this idea that all of a sudden they're going to be all things to all people, I think it's just going to dilute the brand. I think it's completely contrary to what has made it an exceptional product up to this point.
That's exactly right. I think of HBO the same way. I think, in the United States, HBO is the most frequently requested cable channel among the U.S. cable operators. It has a huge fan base and it is appreciated. And I think, when you know that any business actually has a commitment to sort of quality and craft and isn't making something, for the vast majority of people, but something good that some people will appreciate and those people will appreciate it and pay for it. So it's a totally different direction for the company. And I want to come back to that in a minute. The naming conventions, aside from just what they're putting into HBO Max, the naming conventions have been really confusing people. Because when a new product like this is rolled out, there are three things that are always asked, or maybe they weren't asked in this case, but should be asked about this new product. And any company should go through this the process. So number one is, what is the product? And number two, why? Why should I buy the product? And then number three, how? So if we look at the what is the product, it's HBO, but it's also not HBO. And it's some new HBO shows. So there's no coherent message there. If you can't answer what a product is very quickly and have the person understand what you're saying, that's a huge challenge right off the bat. So secondly, why would someone buy it? And, this is an interesting one because HBO fans, if you love HBO, you probably already have it as part of your cable mix or through an app through HBO Go. So, as Greenblatt mentioned, non-HBO fans are an option. So they also want to go after non-HBO fans who theoretically are completely different to HBO fans. And here's the thing. If you don't like HBO, why would you buy HBO Max? Because it already has a sort of brand recognition, and going after people who have chosen not to use your product is a very steep hill to climb, even if there's new shows going in there, because the brand recognition is so strong. Go ahead, Yoon.
Yeah, well, and I'm sorry, but that sound clip you played, I didn't come away from that understanding what the distinction is going to be between the new programming from HBO proper, we'll call it, and HBO Max. They're effectively saying, yeah, we're going to continue to develop programming for HBO, and we're going to develop new programming for HBO Max. It's like, well, so how are they going to be different? What's going to distinguish one product from the other? How am I supposed to determine which product I then want? Are you going to be doing sort of cheaper half-assed content for HBO Max and the marquee shows like your Game of Thrones or The Wire? These kind of programs are going to continue to air on sort of the de facto, HBO. That wasn't clear at all. It just, again, it sounded like a bunch of gobbledygook.
Yeah, the risk here is, so if let's just say Greenblatt is successful, that they go after non-HBO fans or people who want a huge selection, of television shows and movies similar to Netflix. If you succeed in building that, it will naturally mean the end of HBO's current reputation, which is not that. Trying to straddle that line is very difficult. So either they succeed in bringing in tons of new fans, but harm their image, or they maintain their image and lose that battle. There's kind of no win to it, which makes it even more confusing and compelling on some level. But I do want to get to the how can I buy it, which would be the third question. And as confusing as this has been so far, I think this one takes the cake. So HBO Now subscribers will be automatically upgraded to HBO Max subscribers. So the cost is the same. However, if you have HBO Now on Hulu, Apple, or Roku, no upgrade to HBO Now, even though you pay for it. And no indication of when there will even be any information about that. So if you watch HBO Now on some other platforms, you get the free upgrade. But if you watch on these three, which are huge, Roku has the biggest, set-top box TV market in the United States. You can't watch HBO Max on it. So HBO Go remains in some markets. If you do have them on cable, you'll still be able to watch on HBO Go. And then HBO Max is available in the US only, but not available on set-top boxes where HBO Now will continue to be played. This is a mess. This is a communications mess. It sounds like the business plan was not thought through. And I'm not even here to say that they will be unsuccessful. They may be successful at this. And for their sake, I hope they are successful at this. But by choosing this course of action, they're making it much more difficult on themselves. The one thing, the advice that we give to companies all the time is know your brand, know who you are, know what you represent, know why people like you. And for your business strategy, not just your communication strategy, you want to go hard in that direction. And, HBO can create more shows. There's no question about that, although there is going to be a limit. And I worry that by going down this path, HBO Max is just going to be a Netflix, not clone, but a very similar product that costs more money to subscribe to. And you'll get some good HBO shows, no question. But going up against Netflix is a very difficult thing to do. And I just don't think this was thought through.
Well, isn't, that old adage of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, I don't know nearly enough about the financial state of HBO, but I mean, are they currently in a situation where they're not making enough money financially that they have to completely try and reinvent the wheel here? Is this necessary?
Well, they are looking down the road, and it's possible that sooner than we would think that regular cable television might not be around or be as prolific as it is now. So I mean, you can see the direction everything is going, and it's app based, or it's an app you can install on any platform that you want: your phone, your television, your PlayStation, iPad, on and on and on. And so there's a clear benefit that way. And also just that's the way that media is being distributed now. So, but HBO has been known to be very slow to move because they have had a much better reputation than some of the other networks, but they really waited a very long time to decide to go down this road. And I think if I were there, and obviously there's going to be business numbers that I don't have access to, so I'm really just basing this off of what I've been able to read and glean about its situation. I think they could have gone down a more Apple route. And I don't think Apple should have gone down the route that they went down. But Apple TV, not the box, but the service, they only show original programming. So it's quite light. When it launched, I think they only had like 6 or 7 shows. But they've been rolling them out quite regularly. And so they're building up, an app and a network full of content, but it's all original content at this time. I think that's very difficult for Apple to do because it doesn't have a reputation as a television network. And so it has a big uphill climb, to make that successful. But HBO was primed for that kind of thing. Because HBO is well loved already, and if it could take their existing library, their existing hit shows, and then make more of that kind of original content, I think you may have a service that you could price even higher because you're going after the premium end of the market. I think trying to compete just on quantity it almost commoditizes the shows to some degree. I mean, they're not commodities because, some shows are more valuable than others, obviously, in terms of viewership and revenue. But it does tarnish the brand. They're going in a different direction. I think there will be some blowback from that.
Yeah, well, I mean, perhaps I'm wrong, but I always sort of operated under the assumption that HBO was already sort of at in kind of the upper echelon in terms of the quality of programming, such that their issue certainly isn't, if they have one, that they don't have a big enough volume of content. But hey, I mean, I don't work in the industry. What do I know? It just strikes me as strategically a very, very poor choice to sort of move into a higher saturation level of content simply to try and compete with Netflix. It just seems short-sighted.
Yeah, the other example is Disney Plus. I mean, Disney Plus has had the most successful launch of any of the streaming networks. And, why is that? Because Disney has just a huge library of intellectual property with characters and franchises and whatnot. And so I think HBO is more akin to Disney in that way, but for adults. And, Disney, alongside their library, they also rolled out new Disney shows. And I think they got 30 million subscribers, I think, in just like a month. And it's 30 or 33 million. It's right around there, which is, it's insanely high. And that's based off its reputation, its shows, its IP. And HBO had a very similar setup. And I think, one thing we're just seeing just in markets in general is that people are willing to pay more, if they perceive that product to be premium. I think we see it with HBO Now already at $15 a month, which is quite high just for HBO only programming. You see it in hardware, televisions, all kinds of stuff. There is room at that higher end, where they could have stayed and doubled down on their reputation, further strengthened their reputation, and gone about it that way. So I hope it works out for their sake. I hope it works out. I'm nervous though, because, filling up their channel with all kinds of, random shows they purchased, it might not look very good. I do want to mention one thing though. This is a story. I may have told this to you before, but I was at some seminar. I can't even remember where I heard this, but it talked about HBO and Netflix and how HBO missed the boat on this. And it said because, when HBO is planning its schedule and it's buying shows, it's thinking of time slots for those shows. So it's thinking, prime time Monday night. What are they going to show at noon on Sunday? Bill Maher is on Friday night. So they're thinking of filling out the schedule that way with hit shows in primetime slots, which makes sense. But there's only 24 hours in a day and 7 days in a week. So there's only so many shows that they are even able to broadcast. Whereas Netflix looked at it a completely different way and said, we don't need to fill a timetable like that. We can literally have thousands of shows because there's no limit. And, this is such a good example of seeing the world the way that it was or the way that you're familiar with and completely missing how the world has changed. And this does happen a lot. I mean, there's a lot of case studies out there about this. But as HBO was trying to innovate and trying to do more, it just didn't even cross HBO executives' minds to go the route of Netflix in the very early days. And that's one reason Netflix has been so successful. I mean, to this day, I think Netflix is so far ahead of the other networks, and maybe because also they are international. I mean, HBO is in a couple of international markets. I think Netflix is in more than 100. So, I mean, there's just no comparison. And as Netflix continues to generate revenue, I do think that their show quality is going to increase. And if it does, that hurts. That will hurt HBO because they've now positioned themselves as a Netflix alternative. And I'm not sure if they're really built for that, but we'll see. Anything else on that, Doug, you want to mention? Or can we move on?
No, I think we can move on, but I think I would like to use this as a very, very quick opportunity to mention, because you spoke to sort of the international quality of Netflix, and Jill, my wife and I, she and I have started watching a show called The Kingdom on Netflix, which is a South Korean series. It's a period piece, and it provides sort of a very, very interesting twist on the zombie genre. Really? Highly recommend it. But what's sort of interesting and cool about it is, as I understand, it's the first Netflix production in South Korea. So sort of to your point, I can sit in my living room in Toronto, Canada, and watch a really, really cool South Korean drama with great production value on Netflix. And that's kind of neat if I'm now going to have the opportunity to sort of get to engage with some really cool international programming that I otherwise wouldn't have access to. I think, again, that's also a leg up for Netflix. That's it.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that's one cool thing about Netflix. And I will say, when I don't watch a ton of TV, but when I open Netflix, I usually see multiple things that I would like to watch, usually sort of more on the documentary side or, those kinds of items. I mean, there's just so much on there. And I think, yeah, it's comprehensive, and you're getting good value at the price that Netflix is at the moment, in my view. And it's just got such a head start. I mean, all of the countries that it's operating in, I mean, it takes a long time to get all the necessary licenses and things like that. They've been managed well. I do want to move in now, Ewan, to the recommendations, because I think we have a couple today. What have you got?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, actually, it was an article that you had sent to me, I believe, that interestingly was sent to me by a few different people. It was a Vox article. We can share it in the show notes. And the title of the article was "The Inescapable Pressure of Being a Woman on Zoom." And I guess in some regard, this sort of ties back to what we were discussing earlier, where the women have been disproportionately hit hard by the pandemic. But this was more sort of speaking to cultural norms in terms of the Zoom media and the Zoom calls, and particularly in our profession, in the legal world, and in litigation, we've had mediations and examinations for discoveries. They've continued over Zoom. And the article discusses the pressures that continue to apply to women that men seem to have been relatively immune to. So it talks about things like women being disproportionately concerned with, their appearance, notably hair, because they can't get their hair cut, makeup, and that they're constantly apologizing for these things. And there's a really great soundbite in the article where they're interviewing a litigator in the U.S. who says, look, this is ridiculous. I'm a litigator. I'm a mother. I don't need to apologize to anyone for the fact that I haven't had my hair cut in a few weeks, or I'm not as made up as I might be under normal circumstances. These are not normal circumstances. And we have to stop putting and applying this kind of pressure on women to constantly look a certain way or be perceived a certain way in a professional context when it's completely irrelevant to their ability to do their job. And then, they sort of, the article kind of juxtaposes that with men who, are kind of virtual high-fiving each other for the fact that they haven't shaved in weeks. And hey, isn't this fantastic? And look how long my hair is. And nobody seems to be holding men to that same standard, let alone men themselves. So anyway, I thought that was that was quite an interesting article, and we should share that with the folks.
This is similar to what we talked about earlier. I think this also is a societal problem that's just become more acute in the COVID-19 age, because, I mean, if you stand back a bit, like, I do think females are under a lot of pressure to, dress and look well all the time. And I think, on Zoom, it's just a little stranger than normal because you're actually not leaving your house. And normally you don't really sort of do your hair carefully. I don't think anyway. I'm a male, so I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I would think, you're at home. It's more relaxing. You go out. I think especially women get ready to go out. And I do think this is a problem. I wanted to ask you, though, on the sort of Zoom culture there, because, I work at Tencent. So we use Tencent Meeting, which is, their meeting app that's like Zoom. They came up with an English version of it. It's got the name. It's called Voov, VOOV. Anyway, it works just like Zoom. And I obviously use that a lot, but I also use Zoom and I use Microsoft Teams and even Skype from time to time. But there's kind of a cultural norm here now to not turn on the video camera. So a lot of meetings, the audio's on, but the video's off. And is that common there, or is it almost always video?
Well, in the legal context, the video is always on. Absolutely. For examinations, for discovery, for mediations, it's not an option to turn off the video. Although one thing, interestingly, the Vox article talks about and suggests to try and get away from this idea and of being fixated on our own image, and is our hairstyle appropriately, are we wearing the right makeup, is to turn off the video that the camera image that is of yourself, to effectively eliminate that. So as opposed to being fixated by the idea of how do I appear on the camera, just turn it off. And then you don't have to think about it at all. You can just focus on the other individuals. But yeah, generally speaking, in a legal context, the video stays on. I know in terms of dealing with clients, rarely are they insistent on video. In fact, I think a lot of clients that I've been dealing with over the last number of weeks, they kind of like the idea of, hey, we can jump on a call and I don't have to worry about, making sure I'm in a suit, or my hair is styled properly, or I'm clean shaven, because it's sort of irrelevant. We can just kind of relax and have a call. So I think that's good. And I'm very interested to see what happens when we go back to some semblance of normal. Particularly with, initial consultations with new clients. Are they going to continue to come in to meet in person the way that they typically would pre-COVID? Or, now that these sort of new norms have been established, are more consultations going to go forward either over an audio call or a video call?
I hope so. I love doing these calls instead of meeting face to face. Like, I really dislike meetings. I find them disruptive, and like, I can be in a groove of working and suddenly it's like, oh, get up, go to a meeting room, sit down with whoever you're supposed to meet with, or outside vendor, whatever. It's so much nicer to put on headphones and just click join and begin talking. I don't know, it shouldn't be that much of a difference, but to me, psychologically, it's a big difference. And I much prefer it. But and just now you were saying turn off the video so the person doesn't see the video. You're saying the person won't see themselves, their own video, or they're not sending their own video to others?
No, I'm just talking about they won't see themselves.
Oh, I see.
That,
Okay.
this is discussed in the Vox article, that this is part of the problem, right? I mean, all of these video apps, the normal setup is, there's a large image where you see the person that you're speaking with, and then a smaller image where you can see yourself to make sure clearly you're positioned in front of the camera properly, etc. And, the article sort of suggests once you've figured out that, hey, I'm sitting in the right space, turn that video off. So that way you're less self-conscious, you're less fixated with, hey, do I look appropriate? Don't worry about that. Turn your camera off, and then you can focus on the situation at hand.
The fallout from COVID-19, I mean, it's going to be happening for years. A lot of these things are going to change. Okay, I wanted to mention two quickly. The first one, again, I'm a huge fan of the Ezra Klein show. He's one of my favorite journalists for a number of reasons, but he has sat down with Ta-Nehisi Coates to talk about what's happening in the United States. And it is, I mean, like a lot of his discussions, very, very enlightening. It goes quite deep into it. And it's just one of those conversations where you start listening to this, and you start listening to Ta-Nehisi Coates' perspective and his thoughts, and an hour can go by without noticing. It's an engrossing interview, and it really provides, I think, a really, really good look into the sort of systemic problems that exist with law enforcement in the United States. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Oh, cool. Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, please do. The other one. This is something I have been thinking about a little bit. Not in the way you would think, but anyway, there's an article that was published in The Atlantic called "The Best Way to Handle Your Decline is to Confront It Head On." And, I read an article years ago now about people's decline in terms of their reflexes, their thinking, their abilities, and how subtle it is, and how minute the changes are day to day, but how they do add up to something much more significant. And they use the example of a baseball player, someone who is going to the plate and is easily, hitting the ball and getting on base, or hitting a home run, or just basically, getting on base. And how, as you age, because they tested this sort of player, and even year to year or month to month, their timing is off a fraction of a second, but it's just enough to turn that base hit into a foul ball. And you feel right. You see the ball coming. You're familiar with it. You know you can hit it, and you attempt, but it doesn't work like it did before. And so I've always thought about that since then, because I think about, like I follow sports closely, and you look at, players who age, and you think, wow, like they're a different player sometimes at 34 than they were at 30. And that's just 4 years. And then you think about it in the workplace. I mean, obviously, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have worked with people who, have begun to be not quite as good as they were before, or their systems are not catching up, or whatever it might be. And so it is an interesting subject to me a lot. And this article takes a look at how you deal with that. And, the number one piece of advice from this is to, confront it, talk about it. It's just like death, rather than sort of internalize everything. Put something into the open, put your decline into the open and address it, because it takes away a lot of its power, over individual people, and a lot of dread and a lot of fear can go away if you're open with it. And I think it's a very, very interesting article. I'll put a link to that in the show notes too.
Cool. That sounds great as well. I haven't read that. And yeah, it is a very interesting subject. I mean, we certainly see that a lot in the legal profession, is there are too many, and we've talked about this before, just too many lawyers that stick around well past their expiration date because they don't really know what else to do, right? They haven't over the years developed hobbies or social infrastructure outside of work, because their work has been so all-encompassing that there has been nothing else. And therefore, when they try to take that away or to retire and move on to other things, there are no other things to move on to. And inevitably they return, be it in a part-time capacity, or they continue to work in a full-time capacity, and effectively turn a blind eye to those issues that you're discussing. So yeah, very, very interested to check that out.
For sure. Anything else you want to add, Ewan, before we wrap up episode number 9?
No, just again, it's wonderful to know that people are listening and enjoying the show, and please send us your questions, send us your comments, discussion topics, ideas. We'll take it all, we'll review it all. We really want to hear what you guys think about the show.
Absolutely. Very, very well said, Ewan. And for me, because we record this show quite late on Sunday night for me, so it's 20 to 1 in the morning. So I just want to apologize in advance, because I do feel a little bit low energy today. I can just feel it in my voice. But it was still a very good discussion today, and we really appreciate you joining us. So if you did enjoy this podcast or any of the other ones that we've done, please tell a friend, let them know. We definitely, feel very encouraged when we see our subscription numbers each week. It really does mean a lot. It tells us that, we're providing something of use anyway. And you can also follow us on social media at PR Law Pod, PRLAWPOD, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and even Instagram. So that's it, everybody. Good times. This is Cam McMurtry for you and Christy. We'll see you next week.
This has been the PR and Law Podcast with Cam McMurtry and Ewan Christie. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend or leave a review. You can also join us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook by following our account at PR Law Podcast. That's all one word, PRLAW Podcast. Thanks for your support.